everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to be doing my July wrap-up. So July was a bit of a strange month for me. I always find that I'm very busy in the summertime between taking the kids to activities, going and doing things on the weekends, going to the pool, work, etc. There just seems to be a lot to do. And even though we still aren't back to the point where we can travel as in out of the province, we have done a fair bit of traveling just back and forth to St. John's to see my family, and it's all over been very, very busy. Along with that, I have found myself watching more anime this month. So I have been watching TV, which is not something that I typically do, and I have been watching more than usual. So all of that has definitely cut into my reading time. Add that to the fact that we did a readathon in June and I was reading a lot. I just felt like it was time to take a little bit of a break in July, have a bit of a gentler reading month, and relax a lot more. So that is what I did. And I ended up reading not as many books as I typically would. I'd say I read about like half the amount that I typically read. And while at the end of the month, I'm like, oh, there's so many good books that I wanted to get to, I also am happy that I had the time to kind of pull back a little bit and enjoy those other things. And the books that I read were, for the most part, books that I really enjoyed, and I am excited to talk about them with you today. The very first book that I read of the month was one of Stephen King's new releases. So that is Later by Stephen King, which was released earlier this year, and I just got around to reading this month. The premise of Later is that we have a young boy named Jamie. I always pull this up because Stephen King really loves his J names. Like there are Jacks, there are Jakes, but the protagonist in this book is named Jamie. And Jamie has a particular supernatural ability that gives him insight into certain events that have happened. And what we get in Later is us following the story of Jamie as he interacts with his mom's volatile policewoman girlfriend, and the circumstances that kind of surround the three of their lives. It is a very short book. I think it's around like 200 pages or so. But for anybody who really liked the kind of classic Stephen King novels with that bit of a crime edge, I thought it was really, really enjoyable. I had a really good time reading it. It was on the scarometer, the scarometer, for people who scare easily like me. I did find that there was like a little bit of that frightening feeling when I got about halfway through the novel. There were definitely some very creepy moments, some moments where I felt like I had to turn on the light when I was reading, but nothing too over the top. I know people usually ask, like, is this a good place to jump in? Can I read this without having read anything else? This is definitely a book that would show off some of Stephen King's strengths, which would be coming of age stories, writing compelling characters. It has a very tight plot. I really liked the ending. I thought it was very easy, it flowed very well. There are some connections to some of his other books. It's not that you won't understand what is happening if you haven't read those other books, but for people who have read certain books, there are some connections there that they will get and they will understand. So that really is up to you from where you want to jump in, but I think it would be a fine place to start. And if you are interested in picking it up, I had a really good time reading it. It's not my favorite of his work. It is not my least favorite of his work, but I had a really good time with it. So very happy that that was the book that I used to start off my reading month. The second book that I read this month is a new release for 2021. So that was The Blacktongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. And I did do a spoiler-free review for The Blacktongue Thief. So if you've been thinking about reading it, then feel free to check out that review. This is one of the 2021 fantasy releases that has been getting a lot of buzz. There are a lot of people who are saying that this is the best fantasy release of the year. There was a lot of hype around it going into the novel. And I think I understand why. And that is because Christopher Buehlman has a very distinctive voice. This book is told from the perspective of our main character, whose name is Kinch, and he is kind of a down on his luck thief. He owes a lot of money to the Thieves Guild, who put him through training to become a thief, and he is indebted to them and is trying to find a way to pay off this debt so that he just doesn't kind of go further and further behind. And at the beginning of the story, along with a crew of people, they decide to rob someone who ends up being a knight and a veteran from the Goblin Wars. And this ends up being a very bad idea, and Kinch gets pulled into this quest, and from there it becomes kind of a more traditional quest-based tale, and we follow Kinch and his companions as they go forward to meet their objective. But the reason that I think so many people have been pulled in by this one, and the reason that I enjoyed it a lot, is because Christopher Buehlman has a very distinct voice. You become engaged with Kinch immediately. From the very first sentence, you can tell whether or not probably you're going to like this book. It is very funny, but a very kind of dirty, raunchy type of humor. So if that's not your thing, then I would not suggest picking up this book. But I thought it was really, really funny. There was a lot of tongue-in-cheek moments. I really enjoyed Kinch's perspective. Because it was told from his perspective, I didn't feel like I connected to the secondary characters as much as I would have liked to. And so that did feel like it lowered the stakes for me a little bit. It was a quest fantasy, so parts of it did feel a little bit episodic as we're going from like point A to B to C, etc. But I still had a really good time reading it, and I am really interested to see where the series moves on from here, because this is book one in a series. And I think that I'm likely going to enjoy it more and more as the series progresses, because hopefully we'll get more of that character development and the development of their relationships and all that kind of stuff. So I am looking forward to continuing with this one. It did not blow me away in the way that it seemed to do for a lot of people who read it this year, but I am really glad that I read it, and I found it to be a really enjoyable experience. The third book that I read this month was actually an audiobook that I listened to, and that was Norse Mythology for Neil Gaiman. So I read this because it was one of the only books by Neil Gaiman, one of the only novels by Neil Gaiman, I guess, that I have not read, and I wanted to put together a video for people who wanted to know where to start with Neil Gaiman. So if you have not seen that, or if you're wondering, then please check that out. And I was really, really glad that I finally got to listen to this one. I had also wanted to do so because I enjoyed John Gwynn's The Shadow of the Gods earlier this year, and wanted to select a good jumping off point to learn a little bit more about Norse mythology. So this is a collection of tales from Norse mythology that Neil Gaiman has selected, and in some cases, as I understand, has put a bit of his own unique spin on them. It is told in his quintessential style, which means that it is very witty, very easy to read. It will definitely make you smile and will engage you the whole way through. If you do like to listen to audiobooks every now and then, Neil Gaiman is a superb audiobook narrator, and he did a fantastic job with this one. I had such a good time listening to it, and it's quite short, so it doesn't take a lot of time to go through and to listen to. So I really enjoyed it. I would say that my knowledge of Norse mythology before this was very, very basic. A lot of it had come from reading comic books or seeing things in video games, or where it had been injected into other places in pop culture, as opposed to reading any of the primary sources or any retellings. So this was a really good place for me to start. I feel like if you already had a decent knowledge, probably like a moderate knowledge of Norse mythology, you wouldn't pick up a lot from this. These are, I would think, some very familiar tales. But I'm never going to tell people not to read a book by Neil Gaiman, because I think that his style is so engaging. I always enjoy whatever I read by him, and this book was no exception. So I was very, very pleased to have read this, and it made it so that I could put that video together. So that was an added bonus on top of reading a good book. The next book that I'm going to talk about is my one disappointing read for the month, and I knew that this was probably going to happen because I had hyped this book up internally. This is something that I had been kind of building up and building up. So the book is Half Sick of Shadows. and for the life of me, I can't remember the author's name. I think it's Lauren Sebastian maybe, but I will pop up a picture of it. It is an Arthurian retelling that was released this month, actually. Well, this will go up in August, but it was released in July. And I have been looking forward to it ever since I heard, I think on Elliot Brooks' channel, that it was going to be published, because I love Arthurian retellings. This is a retelling told from the perspective of Elaine, who is the Lady of Shalott. I really love the poem and the corresponding painting from the Lady of Shalott, and that is an angle through which I had not seen this story told before. There have been other retellings of Arthurian legend from female perspective, some which I greatly enjoyed, some which I, thought were okay, but I had really high hopes for this one because I felt like it could inject something new, something fresh, and I just got really excited. And probably a little bit because I was so excited, but also a little bit just because it ended up not being the type of book that I really enjoy. So it is, in fact, a retelling, an Arthurian retelling from the perspective of Elaine, and it actually revolves around a couple of the major players in Arthurian myth. So we get Elaine, Guinevere, Lancelot, Arthur, and Morgan Le Fay. And in this book, as it is in some retellings, Morgan has a twin sister, Morgause, and then there's Arthur, who is their half-brother. And there were a couple of unique things that were done in this story. So we had Elaine, who is the Lady of Shalott. She is a seer, so she is able to tell the future, which is not anything new, but that is an element that was in the story. In this retelling, Lancelot was part Fae, and he lives on the island of Avalon. And then we have Guinevere, and Guinevere also has some secrets. So she comes from a very wild, untamed section of the country. And all of the main characters that I've spoken about have all converged on Avalon, and they all grow up on Avalon together. And in this version of the story, Uther does not die until later in Arthur's life, and he is expected to return to Camelot in order to stake his claim on the throne. And so they all spend their adolescence on Avalon, growing up together, going through kind of their major milestones and the major parts of their lives together on Avalon, and they all become a very intertwined group of friends, which is not necessarily something that I dislike. I enjoyed getting to know the characters from that perspective. And the way that the story is told is because it's from Elaine's perspective and she has the ability to see the future. The story takes place in 3 different tenses. So we have Elaine in the present, which is narrated in present tense. We have Elaine in the past, which is in the past tense. And then we have Elaine's visions, which we are unsure if or how they are going to come true. And these all happen in the future tense. And I also didn't mind that as a storytelling element, as a writing technique. I thought that it was inventive, it was experimental, and I think in some ways it made for an interesting tale. But in the end, as in The Lady of Shalott, Elaine looks out through the tower and kind of sees Lancelot and sees everybody outside, and she's confined to her tower within the poem. And there's a lot of, in this story, a lot of angst, and it seems like a lot of adolescent angst, even though the characters are adult aged and this is an adult fantasy. And a lot of what drives the narrative is the angst in those personal relationships, which again, I don't necessarily always dislike. I like a good angsty romance every now and then, but it didn't feel like an Arthurian retelling. It felt more like Arthur on the CW. And B, I didn't feel like, for a book that was supposed to be so focused on the relationships between the characters, we didn't actually get to know the characters that much. I feel like the author was getting us to lean into our previous knowledge of Arthurian legend and not filling in a lot of those gaps. And while she gave some of the characters some kind of unique twists or unique traits, they were very surface level. We didn't really get to dive deep, into their motivations or into their passions or what drove them. I didn't feel like I got anything more than kind of cardboard cutouts of characters, which sounds really harsh, and I don't mean to be, but I think that I had just built this up so highly in my own mind that it did not at all live up. And then also there were some things that I just really didn't like about it. Like I said, I thought that the experimental writing style was really cool. I really enjoyed seeing things from Elaine's perspective. I enjoyed the ending, and I enjoyed how some of the plot threads kind of wove out. I do like the doomed romance trope. That's something that always gets me. I always, there's always a feeling there that definitely manages to elicit emotions out of me. So there were a bunch of things about this that I should have really liked, but it just ended up not being the book for me. So if any of those things are things that you're interested in, it was very easy to read. I read it very quickly. Might not seem like it because I only read like 5 things this month, but I did read through this one pretty quickly, and it was very easy to read. So by all means, still check it out. If you have read it or if you're planning to read it, then please let me know, because I'd love to hear from other people. I haven't seen anybody do a review for this yet, so I'm not sure how people are feeling about it. But if you have read it, then please let me know. The last book that I read of the month was actually my favorite book of the month, and this is a very strange book. This was Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. So I had never read a book by Rivers Solomon. This is the first one, and I think I had seen Angela on the Literature Science Alliance talk about it. Not in her review, because I went and watched her review afterwards, which was great, but in maybe like a wrap up or something like that, I had heard her mention it, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool, I will check it out. And so I bought it the last time I went to the bookstore and read it over the past couple of days, and it was so good, but very, very strange. There were a couple of us that were reading it on Discord, and a few of us really liked it. Someone DNF'd it, and I think that this is probably going to be polarizing. Like, you're either going to really get sucked in by the style, or you're going to be like, what is this? No, and just shut the book. The premise is that there is a young woman who is growing up on a compound, essentially, with a group of people who follow a certain religion, which is called the God of Cain, or the religion of Cain. And it's basically Black people who are shunning the ways of the white man, which is essentially how it's set up on this commune. And this young girl, whose name is Vern, is on this commune, and even though it started off as a place that was supposed to be very accepting, very tolerant, over the years, Vern has started to notice that there is this kind of dark undercurrent within the space that suggests that maybe things are not exactly as they seem. But I think that Rivers Solomon also does a really good job of showing how characters can have this very atypical, very traumatic upbringing, but also have pieces of that they want to retain, or that they appreciate, or that they even love. This was a very complex topic, and it was a very complex main character in Vern, and I think Rivers Solomon handled it beautifully. This was such a moving book and such a strange book. So essentially, like, this all happens at the very beginning. So Vern escapes from this commune, and she escapes into the woods. And in the very first chapter, she is in the woods giving birth to twins. And so we see her raise these babies wild in the forest. And all while this is happening, you get this sense that you don't understand everything that's going on. And it's because that Vern does not understand everything that's going on. And so there's this kind of creeping sense of mystery as the book is unfolding. And that leads to a book that has a very profound sense of atmosphere. So you feel like you're in that forest, and you can feel this oppressive weight that is almost pressing down on the main character. But then there are also some really like fast-paced action scenes, because this is a survival story, and there's something that is out in the woods with Vern that is not even so much hunting her as trying to play tricks on her. And then as the book unfolds, we get to see that maybe there are some paranormal or some fantasy elements that are being woven in that we also don't really understand. So if you are going to go into this book, you have to be okay with not really knowing everything that's going to happen as you're reading through a story. You are left in the dark for a lot of this. And it's not even that you're given clues to this big mystery that's going to unfold. It's more that the author put you in the mindset of someone who has undergone such severe trauma that they can't always rely on their own memories. They can't always rely on their own mind. And it is fascinating. Aside from the really cool unfurling of the plot, the vivid atmosphere, the writing is also beautiful. I really enjoyed the writing style. It's very poetic, so it definitely skews toward that lyricism, if that's something that you enjoy. But if you enjoy kind of straightforward plot, straightforward prose, then I would say definitely veer away from this one. It, I think, straddles that line between literary fiction and fantasy fiction, which is a place that I really like. It reminded me a little bit, it is not at all the same in topic, not really the same in style, but it gives me that same kind of vibe as This Is How You Lose the Time War. Just that sense of not really being sure of everything that's happening, but hoping that this beautiful language and these compelling characters will take you there. And you do get there, at least in this book, in Sorrowland. There is an underlying plot. There is, you do get to see it advance, and you do get answers to the questions that you have been asking since the beginning of the book. Thematically, this is also very rich. It touches on colonialism. It touches on trauma, on intergenerational trauma, on the complex relationship between parents and child, what it's like to not trust your own feelings, what it means to discover who you are and be okay with that. And it just offers up a lot of opportunity for reflection. And I thought it was really, really good. This is also not too long. It's about, I think it's 368 pages. And I found it very easy to read through. I really liked it. There are some very vivid scenes, and there is a lot of violence. One very strange sexual scene. So if any of those things bother you, then probably not for you. But I just found it to be so compelling. It really hit that niche between fantasy and literary fiction that I really enjoy, and the writing style really worked for me. So that was definitely my favorite book of the month. I'm so glad that I picked it up, and I will definitely link Angela's review here because I don't think I will be doing a review for that one, but her review was excellent. So if you want to check it out, then feel free to do that. Outside of those books, those are the only novels that I read this month. I did, because I had been sucked into watching Haikyuu, which, if you don't know, is a volleyball anime that came out a few years ago. And I got so into it that when I got to the end of the anime, I really wanted to finish the rest of the series. I needed to know what was going to happen, and I could not wait for the rest of the anime to be released. So I also spent a good chunk of July reading through the volumes of Haikyuu that take place after the anime until the end. And I have not read the final volume, which is volume 45. That comes out in Canada in 2 days. Well, I guess this is going to go up on Monday, so it'll be out the next day on Tuesday. And I am really looking forward to the end. I loved Haikyuu as an anime. Sports anime and slice of life is usually not my thing, but this was just so engaging. If I have not mentioned this in another video, was a competitive badminton player, which I am aware is like the nerdiest sport to ever be an athlete in. But it just, Haikyuu captures that sense of camaraderie, of growth through sport, of that drive to win, that pull to be better, and it was just such a joy to watch, and the manga was also a joy to read. So I had a great time with that. I'm really looking forward to finishing this series on Tuesday, and yeah, so I'm not a big manga reader, but if there's something that I really want to know how it's going to end, then I will read that, and that's what happened here. But that is my July wrap up. Like I said, not a lot of books this month. If you have seen my August TBR, I'm hoping to switch that around in August, so we'll see how that goes. I think things are going to be a little bit slower, hopefully, and we will see, but I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully I will have a great reading month. Please let me know what you read and enjoyed in July, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye!